Welcome to Let's Rewatch It Again. I'm Jordan, and nope, I am totally off center. Today we are rewatching Boy Meets World Season 4, Episode 21, Cult Fiction. If you didn't already hear my episode on Boy Meets World from this past summer, let me give you a little insight into the show. Boy Meets World was a 90s sitcom about a boy named Cory navigating the world around him. This show is not your typical sitcom. Sure, we have silly antics and a laugh track in the background. However, this show managed to bring some very serious and heavy topics to light in a very relatable and impactful way for all ages. This is the type of show you can watch with your kids, with your parents, as a teen, as an adult. Every single episode brings something new and refreshing and just reminds you about what's real in life. In today's episode, we are diving into belief systems. Who or what do you believe in and how that impacts you as a person? Cory Matthews is normally our main character. However, today, his best friend Shawn Hunter is our focus. In this episode, Shawn joins a cult in hopes of filling the emptiness he feels inside. I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to spoil anything. I will say up front, this episode only dips a toe into the dangerous waters of the cult world. I wish we had gone deeper, but I think for only 22 minutes, it's pretty insightful and still brings me to tears every single time. We're going to dive right into our episode proper. Now, I do want to say in season 4, Shawn has been living with a teacher for the past year, Jonathan Turner. Now he's back with his parents who are trying to work out their marriage. If you don't remember, Shawn grew up on what they love to say in the 90s as the wrong side of the tracks. And in this episode, both of his parents are away, and Shawn has been kind of living on his own as usual. He really is like one of those kids who just doesn't have a stable environment to be around. And we are constantly reminded of that, that just like his parents do not put him at the forefront of their attention. And it really shows in his upbringing and his attitude, especially at school. Jonathan Turner, our literature teacher, actually took him in for over a year, and now they are no longer living together, but Jonathan Turner very much feels a responsibility and cares about him a great deal. Our episode begins at school in Jonathan Turner's classroom. He's passing out essays and says that Topanga, of course, did very nicely. Cory, not so much, and Shawn Hunter, bad. As class is being dismissed, Jonathan approaches Shawn and says, "What are you doing, man? Come on, you're a junior in high school. It's time to start taking yourself seriously. Are you even going to college?" And Shawn jokes that, "Yeah, I'm going to go to Hawaii. I feel like I have a better chance outside of the country." And Jonathan's like, "No, I'm serious. Do you have any goals? Like, where are you going in life?" And Shawn is getting just a little bit too sassy with John. And Jonathan tells him, "You know what? You can count on one hand the people that care about you. So don't blow me off." A little intense for this very quick conversation, which I don't think is appropriate in a school atmosphere. This should have been discussed maybe outside the classroom or when everyone else had officially left the room and maybe they sat down together and really talked about this. But I feel like Jonathan is coming from a place of frustration and he really does want to get to the bottom of this situation. But unfortunately, Shawn is just not here for that. Shawn argues that he thinks he does have people that care about him. And Cory speaks up and says, "Yeah, well, I think Mr. Turner might be right. Also, the humidity in Hawaii is just going to make my hair go woo." And he mimics like his hair getting really big, which is so cute and funny. And he's trying to be like, "Shawn, let's take this seriously." But, he's not pushing too hard because, well, that's Cory. Topanga says that she wants to go to Penn State, and Cory, of course, says that he wants to go wherever she goes. Jonathan breaks back in and lets Shawn know that time is running out on what he's going to do with his life. And Shawn lets him know, "Hey, by the way, you're not my guardian anymore. My parents are back, and, this is none of your business, basically." And Jonathan is like, "It is my business. I care about you. Your parents are trying to work out their marriage." And then he points at Cory and Topanga, and so are they. And Cory and Topanga are, of course, being their cute little selves, discussing how in study hall they're going to be kissing or whatever. Adorable. But they finally leave the room, and Jonathan and Shawn have a moment to themselves. Now, something I do want to point out is that we are going back and forth between looking at Jonathan and Shawn from the side view, and then we keep going behind Shawn to look more into Jonathan Turner's face. Behind him in the background, we see a hallway with kids moving around, but also there is a girl in an orange sweater hanging out close to the wall, clearly eavesdropping on this conversation. Jonathan lets Shawn know, hey, by the way, you've had 4 years of security in this high school, but after that, they throw you out and you got to figure out what you're going to do. Again, I don't feel like this conversation is necessarily appropriate in a classroom atmosphere. This is more like the way that your dad probably talks to you at home at the kitchen table. I don't know. I feel like this could have been approached better, but it is happening. So we got to deal with it right now. Jonathan asks Shawn, who are you going to be when you leave this school? And then walks away. Then our girl in orange sweater walks in and Shawn seems to know her, even though we've never met her before. He says, hey, Sherry. And I just want to point out that Sherry and Shawn basically have the same haircut right now. And it like almost low key bugs me. I mean, basically, Sherry's haircut is just a feminine version of Shawn's, being slightly longer in the back and at the sides, but it's the same like center middle part with like the curved bangs and like just softly covering your ears. It's a little bit longer for Shawn as a boy. So perfectly 90s. And this girl, Sherry, just embodies the exact like 90s girl with like the short cut hair, the little sweater, jeans, holding her. I can't. It's so unbelievably 90s. It's amazing. Sherry says that she was eavesdropping and she thinks that Jonathan Turner really did a number on Shawn. And he's like, oh, yeah? She's like, oh, yeah, all that stuff about only a handful of people care about you. I must have 100 people that care about me, and they care enough about me not to judge me like that in front of everybody. I just want to say that Sherry is putting a narrative on this situation and kind of deciding how Shawn feels before he even voices it. That kind of turns him into saying, oh, yeah, that was embarrassing, wasn't it? Now, Sherry has some very intense eye contact with those beautiful brown eyes. She is locked in to Shawn's gaze and does not let go. And I don't know if that she's blinked yet, by the way. She asked Shawn if he wants to go grab a cup of coffee somewhere. And he's like, yeah, we could do that. She says that she's buying, and I promise not to judge you at all. And he's like, yeah, I like girls with no judgment. Poor Shawn. He has no idea what's about to happen. We cut to a building that looks suspiciously like Chubby's, but except not at all. There are no booths or tables. Instead, we've got like couches and lots of dark brick, just like we have at Chubby's. But here we have signs all over the walls, like typical positive sounding words: serenity, strength. There's a candy machine. And instead of seeing candy, we have a giant word of candy. We have some arcade games along the walls, and there's just people everywhere. And everyone looks very put together, very calm. And it's a very quiet atmosphere. There's no music. And when we enter the room, you can't hear everyone talking. There's not a lot of white noise. It's very, very quiet, but not in a creepy way, just in a almost like a library. Everyone comes up to Sherry and hugs her one at a time. Like they line up to hug her and then start hugging Shawn. Once a boy hugs Shawn, he gets uncomfortable and backs away. And he's like, okay, why does everybody know my name? And we see in the background that there is a emblem of the word center, spelled CENTRE, showing us that that is the name of the building we are in. I don't know. This place is weird. Already, it feels just odd, especially because they already knew that Shawn was coming. How did they know this? How did they know his name? We've never met any of these people. He kind of laughs, and Sherry says, you have a sense of humor. I like that. Again, with the intense eye contact. And Shawn's like, you're not laughing. Sherry says that laughter is a mask which denies the reality of the situation and reveals nervousness. And then he laughs nervously and says, so what's up with the music? And she says it's not that kind of a club. It's more of a hangout. Okay. And she says, this is where my friends and I get together and talk about stuff. And he says, these are all your friends? Yep. And they can be yours too if you want. He's like, all right, I guess I could always use more friends. Again, in the background, as we move around the room, we see more words. We've got knowledge on one word. Strength is in the background. We keep getting a little bit of a sight of serenity. Shawn admits that he doesn't know if he's comfortable with the hugging. And then Sherry claims that Mr. Mack says that a hug is a burst of pure love. And Shawn says, well, I think I'm feeling some love right now, and hugs her. And I just want to say that as a teenage boy, you're hugging a girl. Come on. It feels like such a trap. Like it, anyways, I can't. We're going to keep moving on. And then Shawn asks her, so who's this Mr. Mack that you're always talking about? And of course, Mr. Mack comes into the room. The only adult that we have seen, by the way, everyone else seems to be teenager or at least around like early college age group. And Mr. Mack walks in a gray suit with like a black turtleneck underneath. And Sherry is holding both of Shawn's hands, gazing into his eyes. This girl, the intensity of her eye contact is uncomfortable for me personally. I'm not great with eye contact. I really, really am not. But whoa, she does not look away. I'm serious. I don't think she's blinked yet. And she claims that Mr. Mack has changed her life. He's the one that runs the center. Mr. Mack comes up and says, hello, Sherry. Are you centered? And the two of them hug. And then he lets go of Sherry and says, how about you, Shawn? Are you centered? And Shawn laughs and says, nope, I am totally off center. And Shawn asks him if he's Mr. Mack. He says, guilty as charged. And he hands Shawn a soda as Shawn tells him, it's a nice place that you have here. Seems a little touchy-feely at first, but it's growing on me. And Mr. Mack says that you can't always go with your first instincts, Shawn. You've got to give people a chance, Shawn. And Shawn is like, I guess you really like my name, don't you, Mr. Mack? Mr. Mack. And then Mr. Mack invites him to move in. And Shawn's like, are you crazy? What? And Sherry says, we all live here, Shawn. This is where I live. And he looks around and he's like, oh, okay. I see what's going on here. It's a cult. Mr. Mack and Sherry share a look, and the room does this really creepy, okay. Didn't we say a minute ago that laughter was a mask? And the room laughed. I just want to be clear about that. Mr. Mack begins to move around the room and says, this is a place for people who need love in their lives. And Shawn claims he has plenty of love. And then Mr. Mack says, you're judging us, aren't you? Just the way that everyone else in your life judges you. And Shawn says, well, yeah, I don't like that very much, I guess. And Mr. Mack asks him, why don't you like that? And Shawn says that he doesn't like it when someone judges him because he's like, well, they don't know me very well, I guess. Like, you don't know me well enough to judge me. And Mr. Mack says that if you do that for us, we'll do that for you. No judgment. Now we cut to a scene at Chubby's. And I mean, honestly, this is the same set that we were just in, but with things moved around and changed up just a little bit. It's the same brick wall. So it almost makes you wonder, are we just like in a different part of Chubby's building or something? We're just going to suspend belief for this right now. Cory comes down the stairs of Chubby's and finds Shawn with three girls at a table, and they're all studying, which is so not normal for Shawn, by the way. We know this. Sherry is, of course, one of the girls. Shawn jumps up and hugs Cory, and he's like, whoa, what are you doing? And Shawn says that he's just saying hello, and Cory's like, well, please don't do that again. He looks up and says, oh, hello, three girls. Shawn asks him if he's centered, and Cory jokes, well, not like you. Cory asks them to excuse them for a moment, and he pulls Shawn aside and is like, listen, just what exactly is this center of which you speak? And Shawn immediately says, it's not a cult, and points in Cory's face and says, you can't judge us. And Cory's like, okay, but you're talking crazy. I mean, you were there for what, an hour? And then Shawn has this weird little quote, and he gets this very blank look on his face as he says, the length of a journey has nothing to do with its ultimate value, Shawn. Cory just kind of smiles and goes, that's nice. Shawn, listen, throughout our entire friendship, we've talked about everything, right? Girls, movies, music, but we never really talked about what you believe in. And Shawn believes that he's found a place where people let him be who he is without trying to change him and have to like know what his goals are. And then Shawn asks, what do you believe in, Cory? Do you believe in having a mother and a father and a comfortable house on a comfortable street because that's what you have? I don't have that. So I found something with these people. And Cory's like, well, who are these people? And Shawn claims that Cory is trying to take what he has. And the girls claim that it's time to go. They surround him, and Sherry wraps her arm around Shawn and takes him away. And Cory's like, I have a lot of questions about this place. And Shawn's like, good, you should check it out then. Yeah, Shawn was only there for an hour, but I feel like even an hour is a lot in a place where people are filling you with the very thing that you feel like you need in that moment, whether or not that is full truth. I think especially for someone like Shawn, who has been just kind of like bounced around his whole life and never given true security and stability, he really doesn't know how he feels as a person or where he belongs in the world. And that's a really easy thing for people to manipulate by just saying a few kind things and throwing out quotes that seem profound but are empty on the inside. We cut to a scene back in the classroom with Mr. Turner, and he's trying to ask Shawn about the center. And Shawn claims that there's no way that Jonathan can understand. And he says that Jonathan is the most judgmental person in his life. And Jonathan's like, okay, well, first of all, you just judged me saying that I couldn't understand something. Then Shawn says that he's centered and Jonathan's not. End of story. And Jonathan says, wow, this sounds like a really enlightened, open-minded group. Shawn stuffs his hands in his pockets and says, judging. I do want to stop right here and talk about judgment a little bit, in that a lot of people see the word judge or judgmental or judging and see it as a negative connotation. And what they love to do is to say that an opinion can be a judgment. Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be a judgment. So in Jonathan's defense, he's trying to figure out what's going on. But against Jonathan, I will say his tone is a little bit on the offense. He is taking a little more of a negative approach rather than asking questions and listening. But I will say that I feel like Shawn is already on the defense before the conversation even begins, because he knows this is a cult. I have joined it. I know this, and I'm embracing that. And he's already decided that the people in his life are not going to be able to understand. So he's already on the defense and not really willing to defend his new belief system or anything like that. He is so ready to just cut people off if they don't believe in it, just like he does, as quickly as he did. So he's already decided, well, you don't agree with me, so I just can't even talk to you. That is such a difficult place to be in, especially if these people already cared about you before you joined this belief system. They cared about you. They're not just going to stop caring or stop talking to you because you had a day that was different than theirs. Now, I will say there are some religions, when you leave that religion or you change the entity that you believe in, they might cut you off. That is a part of a lot of things, but it's just a little bit intense to assume that just because someone cares about you, they're going to try to change everything about you. Now, I do want to say that I am worried about Shawn, that he so quickly fell into this belief system without questioning it very much, seemingly at all. Anytime that you approach any belief system, any religion, or even just any scientific fact, question it. And I think that you should question, because those belief systems should allow for questioning so that you can decide for yourself, is this truth? And I also just want to side note really quick and say that I am a Christian. I believe in God. I believe in the Bible and that it is ultimate truth. And I question those things in the Bible, but I don't question them and then just leave that question. I take my questions to my God and allow God and people I trust who also follow my same Lord, and we work on those questions together. I don't just blindly follow the faith, blindly believe what someone tells me because they are my elder or because they are a leader in the church. And I think that's the really hard thing about what is going on with Shawn, is that we don't know anything about Mr. Mack. And yet we've completely fallen into believing that Mr. Mack cares for Shawn more than the people that were already in his life. I mean, I don't know. It makes me really nervous for Shawn because I don't think that he has taken the time to really know who these people are. And first of all, who is Sherry? We've never met her before. And it almost seems like she was scoping him out, which just gives me a very queasy feeling on Shawn's behalf. All right, we're going to go back into the scene. Jonathan asks Shawn why he feels a need to be a part of this place, the center. And Shawn says, okay, all my life, I have felt like there is a part of me that's missing. I feel like everybody could tell, like there was this hole in me and everyone could see through it, like I wasn't finished or something. Jonathan is taken aback and he says, I never saw that, Shawn. I mean, if you would have just told me, I could have done something about it. And Shawn says, let's not dwell on what people could or could have done. And Jonathan says, no, let's dwell on it. That's how you relate to the people that care about you. And then Shawn says that that's how he feels about people at the center, that they care about him as a person and they make him feel like a person. And he goes in to hug Jonathan, and Jonathan puts his hand on Shawn's chest and pushes him back. And I just want to say something about hugs. Sorry, but we're going to stop and talk a little bit each time we move through here. Hugs are a really great way to physically connect with another person. Hugs calm down your nervous system. They bring possibly a skin on skin with like arms, maybe your neck or your cheek, or even hands to hands, hands to arms. And they also bring your heart closer to another person's heart. That beat is there on the inside. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can hear the other person's heart beating, but there is that emotional, physical connection with the warmth of your body connecting with another person. And it doesn't have to be sensual in nature. It can be friendly or cordial, but just the fact that you are wrapping your arms around another human and they are wrapping their arms around you creates a physical and emotional connection that can deepen the longer the hug is held. And with more frequent hugs becomes a deeper and deeper connection. And it kind of releases a chemical reaction in your body, connecting you to that person on a deeper level, making you feel more and more close with that person. Now, in saying all of that, a hug is a really simple way to connect with someone without actually saying anything, which can be a really beautiful thing, but it can also be used for manipulation. And that is what we're seeing in this episode, that Mac is using physical touch in a world where we are so starved for physical attention to manipulate young students. And it really just like gives me the full body ick that this adult man is taking young high schoolers into his care in a building where they are all living together, and he's encouraging physical affection. Now, we don't dive into anything deeper in the building of the center. We don't see behind closed doors. We don't see where all of these kids and or adults are living. We don't know what the conditions are. And we also don't know what any of the rules are. We just see constant hugs, and that Mr. Mack is hugging these children. And again, we don't see anything sensual or anything necessarily scary, but I feel like just these hugs that we are seeing lead us to believe that there could be a lot of other things going on that we just don't see on the outside, and that Shawn may not even be aware of right now. But Shawn goes in for a hug with Jonathan to connect with him on that physical level, and Jonathan pushes him back as if to say, this is not a time to hug. We are having a very intense discussion. I'm not okay with hugging right now because I am not okay with how I am feeling. So a hug interferes with what is happening here. It's not going to make me feel better because I'm worried about you. And then Jonathan says that the center is filled with lost souls who have no belief system, who are targets for some guy to bring them over to his way of thinking. He holds on to Shawn's shoulders and says, the Shawn Hunter that I know is one of the most unique individuals I've ever met. And if you let this place take away who you really are, Shawn, then you've made the worst judgment you could make. And then Jonathan tells him that you've made the judgment. And Shawn says, I don't know who I am. And then he leaves. Cory and Eric decide that they are going to investigate this center. And when they walk in, Eric is already ready to take this place down. He holds up his car ticket and says, "Which one of you brainwashed nuts validates parking?" And Cory says, "Eric, listen, I don't want us to underestimate these people. I mean, they did get Shawn." And Eric says, "Cory, no offense to Shawn or anything, okay? But it takes a pretty weak-willed and gullible individual to succumb to this kind of blatant scam." And then this really pretty, sweet girl comes up to Eric and says, "Hi, I'm Alicia. Welcome to the center." And then she hugs him, and Eric is like, "Oh my God, take all my money." Now, of course, Eric thinks this. He's a teenage boy. A pretty girl hugged him. He's going to do whatever she says. Hello. He's attracted to her. This is part of the problem I am talking about. It's funny on the outside, but if you really think about it, this is serious. Eric takes out his wallet and tries to give it to Alicia, and he's like, "Sure, where's my room?" And Cory's like, no, we're just here for a visit." And Alicia says, "I understand you're feeling lost, alone, abandoned." And then Eric says, "Yes, my emotional palette is missing yellow and blue. Where's my room?" And he's just like gazing at Alicia like she is the best thing that has ever happened to him. And I got to admit, she has gorgeous hair. I mean, I see it, Eric. I see it. Alicia takes Eric's hand and leads him off. And Cory is like, "Oh my God, what?" And then Eric says that, no, my new nut name is Sunflower Fortunato. Eric is obviously not taken in by this place. He just wants to be with Alicia. Come on. Cory then turns around and finds 3 girls all standing very close together. And he holds up the little like finger thing that they do on Star Trek. And he's like, "Hello." Then he turns around and finds Shawn, and he's like, "Shawn!" And he holds up in his arms for a hug, but Shawn is not here for it right now. And Cory says, "What? No hug?" "Cory, this center is not for someone like you. You have something to believe in. You should go. I belong here." And Cory's like, "So that's it. You've chosen this center. You're going to live here with these juju fruits. You can't see through this?" And then Eric walks by with Alicia and says, "Cory, I want to live here for the rest of my life. And the beautiful part is, during the winter, I can go to their cuddling and hugging center in the Bahamas." Cory turns back around and says, "Let me tell you something." And Shawn is like, "Okay, come on. It's not like I'm doing drugs or something." And Cory points out, actually, it is like you're doing drugs. This place is messing with your mind. You're not the person I know, and everything you say is artificial. And you're not going to find what you're looking for here. And then Shawn says that 16 years on the outside, he never found it. Cory claims that Mr. Mack can't help you find what you're looking for. You don't even know what it is that you're looking for. And then Cory says, "That's what this guy does. He makes you feel lost, and once he has you, he will never let you go. He will be there every time you turn around. Allow me to demonstrate." And then he turns around, and of course, there's Mr. Mack. He does the Star Trek fingers again and says, "Hello." Mr. Mack says, "Welcome to the center." Cory turns to Shawn and says, "Oh, he's very powerful." He looks back at Mr. Mack and says, "Who do I make the check out to?" Cory clearly is not taken in by this place either, but he feels the charismatic way that Mr. Mack approaches these students, and he's seeing it. He's like, "Okay, I am seeing the power that you hold over this place." He's joking about the check, of course, but yeah. Oh my gosh. It's kind of like that thing when you see someone that is just not quite right and you have that pit in your stomach. Yeah. And Mr. Mack says, "It's all right. I see that you're here to make sure that Shawn is making the right choice for himself. So check us out. I think you're going to like what you see. Nobody judges where you come from or who you are. Everyone here is the same." And as he says this, Mr. Mack moves around, stands behind Shawn, and puts his hands on his shoulders. Again, the touching, the physical touch, creating that connection that we are close. Cory looks around and sees a black door with a giant sparkling star on it. And he says, "Can I go in that room?" And Mr. Mack says, "No, that's the celebrity room." Aha! So we're not all the same here. Mr. Mack finally walks away, and Cory says, "That is the slickest guy I've ever seen." And Shawn says, "I'm not a prisoner here. I can leave anytime I want." And Cory says, "Great. I think we should go right now." He starts to leave, and the lights dim in the room. And Mr. Mack is now standing at a podium under a spotlight, and he says, "Children of the center, let's welcome into our family our new life member, Shawn Hunter." Everyone claps and starts to hug Shawn. There's Sherry again, popping up just when we don't think she's going to. Shawn looks at Cory and says, "Goodbye." "Whoa, I don't love that. We go to the Matthews house where the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, are standing with Mr. Feeney in the backyard. And Cory says that he feels like he doesn't even know who Shawn is anymore. How does he have so much faith in this place? And Alan Matthews, our amazing TV dad, is like, you know what? We're getting in the car. We're going to drive down there and drag him out. I absolutely love that energy. Mr. Feeney says that he's well acquainted with the center and he's actually been trying to get it shut down for a long time now. And he wants to go down there with them. And then he pointedly says that Mr. Mack is a frightening man. He doesn't say anything else. I just want to say that anybody who Mr. Feeney does not trust, I don't trust them either. Mr. Feeney has shown to be a great judge of character, and he always gives people a chance. He doesn't just look at the cover of a book and say whether it's good or not. He genuinely takes the time to get to know people on a deeper level. And so if he says that Mr. Mack is not good, I agree. I didn't need to know anything else. Got it. No other questions needed. Before they can leave, Eric and Shawn show up, and Shawn is like overly polite. He says, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, Mr. Feeney. And Miss Matthews walks up to him and says, Shawn, are you all right? And Shawn says, of course, I'm totally centered. And then Mr. Matthews says to Eric, thanks for bringing him back. And Shawn says, actually, I brought Eric back. Mr. Mack says that he was only in it for the hugs and he doesn't think he was sincere. And Eric's like, well, yeah. Shawn tells everyone to have a peaceful night and then he's going back to the center. And Alan is like, no, you're not. While your parents are out of town, you are our responsibility. That means you're staying here in this house. Shawn says that people like the Matthews were going to try to talk him out of his beliefs. And Amy, Mrs. Matthews, is like, Shawn, we love you. And Shawn says, he said you'd say that. Mr. Matthews is like, all right, fine. That's enough. Get him in the house and tie him up. Mr. Feeney is like, Shawn, those aren't beliefs. This is just a way to escape life that doesn't have beliefs. Shawn goes, that's a judgment. Feeney goes, you're darn right it is. Again, judgment does not have to be a negative thing. It can be pointing out a truth. Even if it's just an opinion, it's like, well, yeah, judging, it's so annoying. That word judge, I can't handle it. Shawn wants to know what's wrong with him trying to find something to believe in. And Mr. Feeney says, I'm all for your search for spirituality, okay? But what you don't seem to realize is that Mr. Mack is conducting his own search for lost souls that he can influence and manipulate. After Mr. Feeney says this, Shawn comes back with, he said you'd say that. And Mr. Feeney retorts, yes, I'm sure he has given you a thought for every occasion. And what I think is interesting about that is that Mr. Mack has not only given Shawn what he thinks is something to believe in, he's also given him thoughts and like words to kind of parrot back at other people. And it's almost like Mr. Mack prepared him a defense for his own belief, which is very interesting because a lot of times when you believe in something wholeheartedly, there's something called faith. And faith is the belief in something that cannot be seen. Mr. Mack is giving Shawn the impression that what he believes in can be seen and can be defended to the ends of the earth. And that just may not be possible. If he really went all the way down to it, I'm not really sure that Shawn understands what it is that he believes in with Mr. Mack's whole society and culture and this center that it is. What is it to be centered? Does he even know what that means? Or has he taken on this word and kind of fit it to that emotional empty void that he thinks he has inside of his chest? Inside Mr. Feeney's house, we hear a phone ring and Mr. Feeney excuses himself to go answer it. And he looks so distraught. All of them do, really. And Cory says, I don't say this very often, but Feeney's making sense. And Shawn's like, well, he's not making sense to me. And then he gets upset because he feels like Feeney is attacking what he believes in. And Amy asks Shawn, why do you feel the need to believe in this center so strongly? And Alan asks, before you met these people at this place, what did you believe in? And Shawn says he doesn't know, nothing. And Alan pointedly asks, did you believe in God? And they all wait for his answer. And Mr. Feeney comes back into the backyard. Okay, I have full body chills already. And he says, he can't even speak at first. He has his hand over his mouth. He's so upset. And he says, Jonathan Turner was in a motorcycle accident. The camera pans to look at the Matthews and Shawn all together. And Cory is the one to ask, is he okay? And Mr. Feeney says, no, he isn't. Alan, would you give me a lift down to the hospital? And Cory asks Shawn to go with them. And he says, no, I'm going to meet you there. And he's like, Shawn, what do you mean? I will meet you there. And Shawn is so clearly upset. He's wringing his hands, his shoulders hunch over. He gets smaller inside of his own jacket and just rushes off. And I do want to say, I think it's very kind of the Matthews to give Mr. Feeney a lift because he is so upset. I don't think he should be driving. So I think it was very responsible of Mr. Feeney to ask someone else to drive him. And honestly, Mr. Feeney is part of the Matthews family. You know, we all like act like, oh, he's the neighbor, he's the teacher, but these people are all a family right here. And Shawn is included in that family. And I think so much of the time, Shawn doesn't almost want to believe that because it's too good to be true. He doesn't have their name. He doesn't have their coloring of their faces, their hair, their eyes, whatever it is. And so he decides, well, I'm not really a part of the family. I'm just the friend. But the words family and friend can be interchangeable and they can mean the same thing. Oh my gosh, I don't know why that's making me a little bit emotional, but it really is. That whole found family thing that is a trope in books is not a trope because it's fun to portray, but because it's a real thing that we have in life. Your family doesn't have to just be the people that you were born to be with, but the people that you choose to live your life with day in and day out. We go to the hospital and you know, I mean, it's just a very like generic looking hospital, but it doesn't look too sterile. I like that we have like this sea foam colored walls. The chairs look almost like they could be comfortable. Cory and Eric are sitting side by side with a small table between them. And Topanga joins them sitting on the table just to be closer to Cory. But I like that she doesn't like immediately sit on his lap. They're giving each other a little bit of space while still being close together. Cory explains that they're still waiting to hear on news from Mr. Turner and that he has no idea where Shawn is. And Topanga's like, Mr. Turner and Shawn are like brothers. Where is he? And then finally, Shawn walks in the room, followed by Mr. Mack. And I do want to say something about Mr. Mack. We have seen him in this exact type of outfit, with just different colors. Today, he's wearing a suit with a white turtleneck underneath. And each time we see Mr. Mack, he always has his hands folded in front of him, a very like stern, not quite comfortable, but a little bit closed off of a body language. It's such a protected facade of a body language. It's very interesting. It's like he's put together just enough. I don't know. It gives me the ick, kind of like a sociopath, how they just seem too calm, cool, and collected. Yeah, a little bit like that. Cory stands up when Shawn walks in, and it's interesting that they don't hug, but they get close together. Cory's the one that says, Mr. Mack, in shock. And Mr. Mack says, Shawn thought I could be of some help. Hello, I'm Philip Mack. And then he sees Feeney and kind of nods to him. And Feeney's like, Mack, you don't belong here. And Mr. Mack says, one of my children needed me. So, of course, as always, I'm there for them, as well as any other child who calls for me. Eric stands up and says, I want to come back. And Mr. Mack says, no. And I just want to interject that I think it's very interesting that Mr. Mack will not include Eric. And I know it's supposed to be funny and just a small release of like the intensity of this moment to have a comedic relief. However, Eric has a stable, loving home environment with two parents who care for him deeply. And both of Eric's parents are still together. They also have a loving relationship, which creates more stability. I'm not saying that having divorced parents can't create stability, but having both of your parents still be together your entire life creates a foundation for you that just feels a little stronger than if your parents have been divorced and you've experienced trauma in that area. So Eric doesn't need the center. So in Mr. Mack's opinion, the center doesn't need Eric. Cory asked Shawn why he asked Mr. Mack to be here. And Shawn says, Cory, I couldn't face this alone. And Cory says, first of all, we're here. Okay. And second of all, I am beginning to see that you are more alone than I ever knew. And Shawn's like, what does that mean? We then cut to Mr. Mack approaching Feeney at a very inappropriate time, I might add, and says, I just want you to know that I forgive you for trying to shut us down. And then he kind of steps off to the side, and Mr. Feeney immediately stands up like he's going to attack him. And Alan jumps up so quick, like, whoa, whoa. And Feeney's like, you forgive me. And Alan immediately steps in front of Feeney and gently pulls him back. And Amy is right there to back them up. And Alan says, come on, he's just trying to get a rise out of you. And at this point, Mr. Mack is standing against a wall. And Alan says, look, you're not dealing with gullible little kids here now, buddy. Now you brought Shawn down. Thanks. Why don't you just take a hike back to Conland? And Mr. Mack says, now, do you see how judgmental these... And then Alan grabs him and shoves him against the wall and says, no, you see. The judgment I made a long time ago is that Shawn Hunter is the best friend that my kid ever had. And I will kill to protect Shawn Hunter from people like you. Whew. I just want to say, again, full body chills. I love Alan Matthews so much. So much. As a kid and an adult, every time I watch Boy Meets World, I gain more and more appreciation for Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, together and apart. What we're looking at from a camera angle right here is completely fantastic. We can see on our left side of our screen that Mr. Mack is completely backed against the wall. He's leaning into that wall, kind of arcing away from Mr. Matthews. Alan is standing in front of him, one finger pressing into Mr. Mack's chest. And behind that, we have Mr. Feeney watching on, completely supporting what Alan is doing. And Amy is standing protectively right behind Alan, her hands reaching out for him. And then Amy gently takes hold of Alan's arm, leans forward and said, Alan, he would love a lawsuit. I bet he would. Mr. Mack adjusts his jacket and kind of shakes his shoulders. And he says, I think there's a lot of anger here. And I don't feel that this is a healthy environment for Shawn. Mr. Mack moves around them and turns toward the center of the room to then have Amy, Feeney, and Alan now with the wall behind them. It's a very interesting way of a dance of who is in charge here, who is on top of the situation. And Mr. Mack, unfortunately, kind of believes that he is on top no matter what. And Mr. Mack says, I know you don't respect my philosophy, but for kids who feel like they have an emptiness in their lives, I'm here to give them a sense of belonging. And Mr. Feeney says, you can't have Shawn. And Mr. Mack says, that's up to Shawn. And in any event, there are many more just like him. So Mr. Mack claims that any child who calls for him, he will come and help. He will be there for that child. However, he's also saying that all of these kids are the same. None of them are unique. None of them are special to him individually. All of them as a group are what he wants. He doesn't care who he gets as long as he gets someone. And that to me is the sickest part of this entire situation. He doesn't care about Shawn. He cares about the number that Shawn creates for his whole center, the validity that Shawn's belief gives him. He doesn't care about Shawn or what Shawn believes as long as Shawn is doing what he's told and reporting back to him at every second. Mr. Mack turns and says, so come on, Shawn, let's go. And then, of course, Shawn is gone, and so is Cory and Topanga. We cut to a room where Mr. Turner is laying on a hospital bed. He seems to have a cast on both arms, one of his legs. We can't see his other leg. He has a neck brace, and his head is completely bandaged, and his face is completely scratched up. This is a really serious accident. I can say from personal experience of seeing a parent or father-like figure laying in a hospital bed, hooked up to wires and an IV, and they just don't look like themselves, is one of the experiences that you never forget it. It stays with you. And in that moment, it can be completely overwhelming, especially if you don't have someone or something like a belief system to turn to in that moment for reassurance and comfort. Shawn claims that he can't be in here. This is too intense. And Topanga says, for all of us, Shawn, but this is life, and this is what is really happening right now. And Shawn claims that he needs Mr. Mack. And Topanga's like, no, he can't help you with this. Shawn, what is the matter with you? And Shawn panics and runs for the door, and Cory stops him. And then Cory grabs him in a hug and says, this is a hug, Shawn, okay? This is a hug. When you hug somebody, when you care about them, and that you want them to know that. Turner took care of you, and you love him, and he loves you. Is that real, or are Mr. Mack and the center real? You decide, but you cannot go. We can go. And he gestures for Topanga, and she slowly follows Cory out of the room, and they shut the door behind them. Now, Shawn is alone with Mr. Turner, who is not awake. So it may make him feel even more alone. Shawn turns and says, John, how could you be in here? How could you screw up on your bike? I have never seen you screw up on anything. He finally walks up to the bed and says, I'm the screw up, remember? Come on, you remember. Don't do this to me, John. I don't do alone real good. He looks up at the monitor and sees that John's heart is beating steadily. And Shawn says, look, I know you're in there, but it's like you're not really here. You're not talking. But I know you're here, so I'm just going to talk. I know that might sound a little convoluted, but I feel like what we're hearing with those lines is that Shawn has faith that Jonathan can hear him in this moment. He can see the heart beating. He can see the brain waves. Even if he doesn't understand all of those machines, he can feel Jonathan in the room with him. So he has faith that if he sits down and talks to Jonathan Turner, that somehow he will be heard. Shawn finally sits down and he says, John, even when I was at the center, it was all the things that you taught me that made me wonder if it was the right place for me or not. But you didn't teach me enough. You and Cory and my parents and the Matthews and the handful of people who really care about me. So don't blow me off, John. Don't blow me off, God. And as he's saying this, he gets louder and finally looks up at the sky, calling out to God. And he says, I've never asked you for anything, and I never wanted to come to you like this. But don't take Turner away from me. He's not done yelling at me yet. God, you're not talking, but I know you're here. So I'm going to talk, and you can listen, which is basically what he just said to Mr. Turner. He has faith that God is listening to him. So Shawn says, God, I don't want to be empty inside anymore. He finally takes a hold of Jonathan Turner's hand, and we get a close-up of their hands intertwined and Jonathan's fingers gently curling around him. We get an end title screen, but then a final little extra that Shawn comes out of the hospital room and says he's going to be fine. And Cory says, oh, the doctor said that? He said, no, I just know that he is. And I just want to take a quick pause and say that I do believe that Shawn had a moment with God in that room. And, you know, people can get into the little details of what it means to really talk to God or how you're supposed to talk to God. But really, when it comes down to it, Shawn had faith that God, a greater power than himself, was listening to him in that moment. And he felt God holding him in that room, filling that empty space inside of him. I think because of this moment, he's forever changed. That doesn't mean that, you know, you're immediately going to be a different person overnight because, hello, you're still a human. You live in this world. Every day we are changing and transforming as people and growing as people. But I do believe that there was a moment that forever impacted Shawn, and that it's a forever change, a forever transformation. And to him, even coming out of that hospital room with confidence that Jonathan Turner is going to be okay is again reinforcing that faith that he not only has in someone that he loves, but in a greater power than himself, God. And the others ask if the doctor said it, and Shawn is like, no, I just know that he's going to be okay. And Mr. Mack steps forward and says, Shawn, I understand this has been a really stressful day for you. Why don't you come back to the center? And Shawn said, yeah, I want to do that. And Cory's like, what? He said, and Shawn continues with, I want to pick up my things. And if it's okay with you, and he looks at Mrs. Matthews, I want to stay with you guys. And Amy says, yeah, it's okay, of course. Mr. Mack tries to step forward and hug him and says, Shawn. And Shawn puts out his hand, presses it against Mr. Mack's chest and says, you know, I see you right in front of me and I hear what you have to say and it's nothing. And if I was an empty person who didn't have anything to believe in, I might go with you because that would be easy. Well, I'm done with easy. I'm done with empty, and I'm done with you. And Mr. Mack nods and says, well, we'll always be there for you, Shawn. And Shawn says, yeah, I know. Mr. Mack slowly turns, nods at the room, and walks away. And that's the end of our episode. But I do want to continue on with that little bit of what we heard from Shawn and Mr. Mack, is that Mr. Mack gave Shawn one more chance and says that he'll always be there for him. Now, a lot of people might say, well, that's fake because he doesn't really care about Shawn. But I do believe that Mr. Mack would be ready to take Shawn back in the second that Shawn gets vulnerable enough to believe that Mr. Mack knows more than he does. Because I'm sorry, we're going to get a little bit on the religious side here. The evil one is always ready to snatch you up the second that you decide that you're not enough for yourself, for the world, for your family, for your friends, or that you are not enough or worthy of talking to God. And no matter what, God really is always there, ready to scoop you up and hold you in his arms for comfort, for safety, no matter what you've done, where you've been, what you've said or thought, or any of those things. God is always there, loving you individually just as much as he does everybody else, but loves you in your specific way, your heart, your mind, your soul. And the evil one is just ready to add to his numbers. And he's always ready to add to those numbers. And I just want to say that I think it's so incredible that Shawn says that he's done with easy, he's done with empty, and he's done with Mr. Mac and that way of life. That easy, it's so easy to pick the simple, tangible way of belief. It's not easy to believe in a God that you can't see or that you just don't trust because you don't know enough about that God. And that's really scary, because the world shows us again and again and again that humans will fail us. They're going to fail each other, and they're going to hurt each other knowingly or unknowingly, on purpose, by accident, especially if you didn't grow up with a earthly father to trust and love, who loved and trusted you back. It's hard to imagine that a heavenly father, God, could do that. And that's hard for Shawn, because he's not always been able to trust that his own father is going to be there, or be there physically and emotionally, even when they are living in the same house. But he is able to see it in Mr. Matthews, in Mr. Feeney. So he has little examples of people that could care for him and what it might look like for a higher power to love him unconditionally. So yeah, so I just want to say all of that. I completely understand if that is not something that you agree with me on. And I don't mind that at all. Not everybody has to agree with me, obviously. I grew up with a really incredible dad, so I've always had a great example of what a father, a man, and a friend should be. So I had it a little easier than most, and I definitely acknowledge that. And I do believe that it's a high privilege that I was given, that who knows why I was gifted with it. But I do want to say that I share my dad with a lot of people. I willingly share him, and have always done that, that anybody who needs a good dad can always use my dad as their own. I want to give this episode 10 out of 10 real hugs. This episode never fails to give me chills, emotional moments, tearful moments, heartwarming moments. And it always brings me back to the meaning of family, real friends, real love, and unconditional love. Unconditional love is really hard to get a grasp on. And it's so good. Anyways, 10 out of 10 real hugs, no question. All right. Thank you so much for listening to Let's Rewatch It Again. I'm Jordan. If you have any comments, questions, anything at all, you can send them to my email at letsrewatchitagain@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on our Instagram at Let's Rewatch It Again. And you can also rate and review this podcast anywhere that you are listening. We're going to continue on next week with our creepy, spooky fall vibes. So until next time, I'll catch you on the flippity flip.